Hey everyone. This AI is making for some strange bedfellows. You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hey everybody, happy Friday. Welcome to our Friday edition of Techstrong Gang. This might be like a red letter gang day. We called in some of the outer chapters here. Forgive me, my wife is binging on Sons of Anarchy, and so I'm into like chapters now. But we've got seriously a security all-star team assembled. We also called in big guy here, Dan O. He's usually on Wednesdays, and he was on Wednesday, but he's going to be here Friday because we're lucky enough to have him in our office and studios here in Boca. Well, let me introduce everyone, and we'll go from there. I introduced Dan O already, Dan O'Brien, President, CEO at Futurum. We've got Jon Swartz out in Silicon Valley, Fred Wilmot up in Seattle, Ira in the D.C. area, Chris from the Great White North, and of course, Mike Vizard still licking his wounds over his Yankees. Guys, it's Friday. This week went incredibly quickly, but we've got a lot to talk about. Mike, with the AI stuff, I'm starting to get the opinion that I know what you are. It's just a question of the price. And what's going on here?
I think we're starting to see, well, I don't know, I wouldn't call it anarchy, but it's basically anybody can partner with anybody regardless. And so what we have lately
is free love.
There you go. Anthropic is partnering up with Google to create an alternative for GPU resources for itself. And IBM partnered up with Groq. And I think IBM makes just about every AI model available. And so does everybody else. So we'll get into what that means in a minute. But Jon, walk us through what's going on here.
Okay, well, we mentioned that these are strange bedfellows. I also think of it as another way, as like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think that's the case with Anthropic and Google. I think of it as a kind of the anti-OpenAI partnership, right? We're this kind of in this era where these companies are aligning with each other for whatever is convenient for their particular task or whatever their goal is. It's almost like this accelerated chess match with billions of dollars in play. And in this sense, the idea, I believe, is to position Google Cloud as a key infrastructure provider for Anthropic's AI operations. It's interesting because there is a relationship between the two companies already. Google's invested approximately $3 billion in Anthropic. I think it's about 14% stake. So we hear so much about Amazon and Anthropic, but in this case, Google has been working with them. And again, I think this is with the idea that Anthropic's nemesis is OpenAI, and OpenAI earlier this week announced Atlas, which is their bid to overtake Chrome. So we have these two companies going at it with OpenAI. So they have this mutual kind of mission to put OpenAI in misery. Now, as far as IBM and Groq, it's interesting because IBM's been doing a lot of deals, and I'm going to pass the baton to Dan before I just quickly point out a couple of the things that IBM's working on. They did an announcement, I believe it was last week, with Oracle. They're also working with Anthropic. So Claude AI models are going to be integrated into IBM's integrated developer environment for software engineers. The deal with Groq is aimed at helping businesses rapidly deploy AI agents through greater speed and efficiency. And I know, Dan, you worked at IBM for a long time, for a bit. And I'm wondering kind of what your take is on what IBM's doing with Groq, because I find that equally interesting is the Google Anthropic deal.
Yeah, thanks, Jon. So, on the IBM side with Groq, I think this is really about, IBM's belief that AI economics are fundamentally broken the way we've come at it to date. I think they're really thinking that small models, purpose-built inference accelerators, that's really kind of where really these scaled AI use cases will find that ROI and that economic fit. right? So I think you look at a lot of the deals they've made. They've had a more recent AMD announcement for AMD's initial rack scale solutions. They've got some NVIDIA stuff through CoreWeave. Anthropic's more providing models, I think, on kind of their code development side of things. So I think they're well partnered across the ecosystem. I think that's been kind of a fundamental belief of Arvind ever since he's come in, is that you need to be able to play nice with the other leaders in the industry and find ways to come together to add unique value for your clients. And I think that's really what's kind of driving them there. The Google Anthropic stuff is really interesting to me. I think on a couple of levels, right? You talked earlier about Google's a $3 billion, 14% investor. Well, AWS is a $8 billion investor, right? And they've really been kind of Anthropic's cloud of choice. So, I think this is really telling us that people need as much supply as they can get, and they will go find it anywhere. I think Anthropic has particular issues in that, I think we're seeing some of the AWS custom silicon, Trainium 3, maybe not being as great as everybody thought it would be. That's coming a little bit later to market, it seems. I think, there's obviously been a fairly public war of words between Dario Modai, Anthropic CEO, and Jensen Huang. They're probably not getting great allocation when it comes to, these very hard to get NVIDIA chips. And, you look around the market, it's really AMD and Google that are those next best options in the market, to NVIDIA right now. Certainly AMD on the GPU side, and I think there's a lot of, really good interest happening in the initial rack scale solutions AMD will bring to market next year. But Google with their TPUs and the custom silicon maker of choice for pretty much everybody who's trying to make it on their own, partnering with Broadcom on that front, I think that's really where Anthropic's coming from, is they need more compute, and this is the most logical place to get it. I wouldn't be surprised to see something with AMD with them as well.
I got to tell you, first of all, I think you're right, Dan. The IBM Groq partnership is so typical IBM. That is pure IBM, partner with everyone. You want something, let me just reach into my bag of tricks. So it gives those IBM salespeople there's nothing they don't have. It's like literally, going in a Home Depot. But on the other hand, part of me says, well, what about Watson? Right? And everyone out here should say that with me. What about Watson? Right? This was the first AI that most of us ever heard of. It was the first AI kind of major play. And poor Watson has become the redheaded stepchild even at IBM.
Well,
Go ahead,
yeah,
Ira.
Alan, let me build on that because, Watson came out, okay, Watson is going to beat people at chess. Watson became a gimmick. And the thing was, then I've worked with people at, IBM doing, for example, in their simulation, they were using Watson for cyber simulations and things like that. I personally think that it was kind of like an interesting technology, but it was more, in my opinion, it became a proof of concept for them to do something with. IBM was never a provider like, the Anthropics of the world or things like that. They were selling services, they were selling equipment. And Watson essentially was a gimmick to kind of sort of make it easy. It was never something that they truly put into commercializing. The one thing I do have with regard to this whole Groq thing that I think is frankly something people are underlooking is that IBM is one of the leaders in quantum computing out there. And when you start looking at why are they working with Groq? Again, from what I read, with Groq, they have their unique set of LPM chips or whatever they are. Sorry, I'm not good with remembering names. And the thing is, in a little bit of time, it's my opinion that IBM's quantum computing will overtake the need for a lot of these faster chips that are out there because of their unique quantum computing ability. And for them to position themselves right now with Groq and start to get a little bit more use out of it to start to commercialize, it'll be much more of a nicer fit to migrate people off of that and onto their quantum platform when the quantum platform becomes, I'll just say, more affordable and practical for people in large scale use. But to the Watson, again, Watson, to me, they treated like a gimmick from the start. Okay. And I actually went to elementary school, and my claim to fame was I beat Joel Benjamin, the guy who trained Watson how to play chess. I beat his sister in chess, and now I'm dating myself.
There you
So in theory, I have beat Watson's sister at chess.
Okay.
Now,
Did she sign your
but
yearbook?
going back, we needed more. It was a unique relationship, but you got to understand that. Sorry, I'll leave it there because I'm just going to go off on some tangent. But this is essentially why I think Watson's kind of an issue or not an issue. At the same time, I think IBM is more just using this as a gap filler.
Well, no,
for
but
a while.
I'll tell you something. I saw Daniel Newman posted something on Twitter, not on LinkedIn this morning, and I looked into it. The fact of the matter is, money, we talk about where's the money, where's the beef in AI. IBM, what they said, they have $8.5 billion?
$9.5 billion.
$9.5 billion backlog.
Listen, I don't think you can actually conflate the Watson that you're talking about with the Watson of today, right? I think you're right, Ira, in that Watson was a little bit less of a product and more of a technology that they could apply to kind of a consulting engagement, story. Like it was like, early machine learning use cases, right? I think what they've built now is much more of a data model governance, like a real platform to manage your AI. I think they've really tried to partner on the large scale models. Where they've gone deep themselves is really on these very domain specific purpose built models, because they're really trying to really help their clients, I think, get the use cases proven out on big models and then bring them to scale using something that really helps fine tune the economic side of the AI equation and really gets a lot more efficient on the compute side.
Absolutely.
Dan, I have a question for you. If I can get an LLM from essentially any dealer on the block, then what will differentiate, an Oracle versus Google versus AWS versus IBM when they're all selling the same kind of basic thing?
I think you're right, Mike. I mean, the model layer is very likely to be fairly commoditized, right? I think it's all about, the tools that you provide to people to provide those guardrails, the governance, the fine-tuning capability, the RAG capability, the ability to really manage models at scale and embed them, kind of across your portfolio of applications the way that you want to.
Yeah, I think frontier models, commodity stuff at this point. But John, I do think you're right that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I wonder with Anthropic, is Anthropic setting up themselves to maybe be in the apple of someone's eye in a bidding war between Google and AWS, Dan, right? Who both say, hey, OpenAI is a threat to us. Anthropic may be the best alternative out there, not having to deal with Elon maybe. And
I think Google's pretty happy with where Gemini's at.
Yeah, well, so why is Google doing it?
More.
I would agree with you, but why do you think Google's doing that, having Gemini in their pocket? Is it the same IBM thing? We want to have a little bit of everything?
I think, if they can create the incremental compute and sell, that's more of an infrastructure cloud play for them, really serving up, compute to Anthropic, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Dan,
they need the workloads to drive the investment justification.
So are they buying a customer?
So
I don't know that
there's
they're buying
three
the
things.
customer. The customer seems to be coming to them with a need, right?
Dan, you said something interesting, and I totally agree with this idea that IBM, through all these partnerships, has kind of methodically, I think they put themselves in a really good position in the AI race, actually. And I ran into a couple of analysts last week at Oracle World, or AI, whatever they call it now, and they mentioned two companies that they thought were probably as well positioned as any amid all these players, and they were IBM and Google. And I just found that very interesting. IBM, through their history, it hinders them at times, but also helps them because they've been through every conceivable transition or wave in technology, and they've adapted. That's why they've been around 120 odd years.
Well, I think Google's, in fairness, probably the full stack leader in AI. I think if we talk about infrastructure to the model layer to the application layer, they're really probably further ahead. I don't think either of the hyperscalers could make a great argument against that. IBM, I think, is positioned itself much more as kind of an orchestrator for big enterprise across all of the suppliers that they're going to use, right? All of their customers are on multiple clouds. All of their customers are working with the major ISVs across ERP, CRM, et cetera, et cetera. And I think IBM has positioned itself with the unique capability on the consulting side to help bring all that together, and then some unique tools on the on the technology side of the house with Red Hat and Watson and what they're doing on that front to kind of be that middleware layer across the technology stack.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of fundamentally look at this like IBM is doing IBM. Like IBM was always a hardware manufacturer. They were a service provider. They were an infrastructure provider. And what they're doing here is essentially growing their capability to be, the AI model, like make their AI models, allow their customers more resources so that they could sell directly. And, again, this is IBM being IBM, in my opinion. And, I look at everybody else and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, IBM has developing an infrastructure. They were never truly good. I mean, they have a cloud environment from what I understand, but they haven't really pushed it. What they've done is they've tried to focus on, quantum computing has been their little niche for a while. Like, so people come to them now to buy quantum plus or quantum access to run their models and things like that. Adding on some AI models on top of this just kind of, to me, makes natural sense. And I mean, I look at everybody else and maybe I'm underthinking it compared to you guys, but it's sort of like, well, when somebody goes with Oracle Cloud, somebody else goes with AWS, it's just natural for me on the, Anthropic going with Google for, infrastructure. And maybe I'm wrong because I thought it would have been Google GCI. But anyway, we'll see how wrong I am in the near future.
Well, I'm going to need to wrap this up because we got to jump to our next block. But I will say this, we got to look at these deals in the context, of that Bloomberg diagram, right? You've got a $4.5 trillion NVIDIA, you've got, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars of open AI, and the deals of an Oracle up 34%, whatever. The deals there are flying, the money passing back and forth with each other. So this is a reaction to that. This is part of that story. And when you take it in its totality, wow, we're going to have stuff to talk about for years. Let's take a break here on Techstrong Gang, but let's come back and let's do do we have an AI cybersecurity crisis? You're watching Techstrong Gang.
You've earned it. The spotlight, the responsibility, the weight of teams, companies, and entire industries fall on your shoulders. Lives depend on your decisions, your home life included. At work, you're protected, physically and digitally. Nothing gets through your team without a fight. But in a globally connected world, everyone sees you, including those who mean to cause you and your organization harm. And now home, your sanctuary. Attackers see an opportunity. Your digital front door is wide open. And what compromises your home can breach your boardroom. Because the devil's greatest trick isn't targeting your workplace firewall. It's convincing you that your personal life isn't at risk. Black Cloak. Digital executive protection, defending the new attack surface. Your personal life.
Hey, folks, we're back. And we're going to have a little chat about cybersecurity and AI. The folks over at CrowdStrike have a survey talking to both security and IT folks, and it suggests at least that they're getting a little concerned that they're falling behind. The bad guys are investing more in AI more rapidly. The attacks appear to become more sophisticated, especially when it comes to phishing. They're also maybe starting to increase in volume, and things are getting a little challenging out there. Chris, what's your take on this? Because I know you've been kind of talking about this, but to me, this shows like there's some actual evidence that this is happening.
Right. And as I said on the Wednesday show, right, one of the things I like through this calendar year is this conversation, because we keep touching on the same things. In the last block, if you're watching just this block, go find the other one before this, because we've been coming along this path, let's say since March, right? And Dan, these conversations with you on the chips and distribution and how this infrastructure works out, when I talk about inevitability curves, what I mean is taking something that looks like it's bound to happen and saying, okay, let's assume it does. Let's go back to the present. What happens between now and then? And to the point of this segment, in this spot, in this month, yeah, we've blown past earlier this week. Remember the conversation about phishing? We've blown past certain things this month in the last couple of weeks that we've seen coming through the year. If in fact we're going, the adversaries in this case are going to have these capabilities, what does that mean for defenses? Well, we keep going through those stages, right? And we're the salt typhoon conversations earlier this year. You have to assume that you're completely mapped out. The gap between what you probably should have done and what you actually have done is known. And adversaries have the abilities to attack you personally. Like none of this, I will make some automated attack to go after a sector or a geography or whatnot. No, you personally, your company, everything about you. That can be automated right now. What does that mean? Well, as cybersecurity people, there may be a smug moment. There's a lot of, as we discussed in this, you can go back decades and talk to people of Gene Spafford and Fred Collin and folks who've been doing this for a long, long time and say, you'll recall, we told you that unless you do these things, someday you will get ants. Well, we've got lots of ants. Fortunately, I think we have a lot of answers, but they're not down the mainstream of what corporations and organizations are used to doing in cybersecurity, and it's changing faster than their organizational processes normally change. Not that I have opinions.
Fred, Ira?
Sorry, could I go?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to go on my normal soapbox. I hate surveys. I hate the use of the term AI, because when you start going to surveys, you're asking a bunch of people, and most of these surveys do not pre-qualify who it is. It's like they go out, hey, please answer, sending to a random mailing list, and somebody gives it to their dog to answer. And so so the surveys are one problem, but then there's the other issue of the generic use of AI, which most people do not understand. They think it's some magical entity. AI these days is just pretty much computing for all practical purposes. And when you're saying, gee, with the growth of AI, it's like with the growth of just being there, the criminals are going to modify their efforts, taking advantage of whatever technologies come along and do what criminals do. That's where the money is. Or if they're going to be, well, actually, we're kind of lucky that people, there's a lot less people just doing things maliciously. It's turned more into a business than just people being vandals. So that's a good thing. But the reality of the situation is that, yes, AI, and I use Dr. Evil quotes for AI, is really nothing more than a set of algorithms that allows you, for example, to personalize phishing messages. It allows you to go through and sort data to allow you to more personalize your attacks to the targets, as Chris was implying. But people have got to understand that stop bitching about this stuff and start realizing that there are likewise AI tools that are commonly in use that they don't realize they're using. For example, like secure email gateways are implementing AI models like they have been for more than a decade and a half anyway. And that, yes, there's a bit of an arms race, but for the average technology user out there, they need to make better use of the tools they have and stop being ignorant, because the vendors, to their credit, are implementing AI models into their tools that is stopping the more advanced AI. And if people would make better use of what they have, they would be, I don't want to say immune, but they would be better protected. And I will now get off my soapbox and pass it to somebody else before I have an aneurysm.
Fred, what about you? You're on the front lines here, man.
Well, Ira, it's always tough to follow the standard soapbox, but what I want to say here is, you're right, there's an awful lot of agility that we don't have today, regardless of what technology you choose to use, and the things that we talk about, that's been hyperbole for like 10 years, 15 years, about whether or not the hygiene problem is something that we can, tame and solve. Here's an important set of factoids for you. Over the last 2 months, we've had 12 RCEs, 9 of which have been O days. So we can say all the things about what we have and what we know, but those are truths. So we're not prepared for those things because we don't know about those things. And the rapidity for which and the veracity of which they're being weaponized is something that is new. Now, in fairness, I'm a detection engineering vendor, so I have an opinion on it based on what I do for a living. But the critical moment is, We're talking about companies and people that have invested all of this money. There's another trailing indicator here, which is the number of folks in cybersecurity that are no longer operating with the same budgets, capacity, or expertise in major industries because they're being cut. And so compare those two things, right, to some of the things we see happening in national infrastructure, CISA, what do we do with CVEs, NVD, and what's happening across the entire industry. And these are going in the opposite directions. So I agree with you 100%, or I think right now we're in a place where there should be deep concern because there's both alacrity from the business on the impact that this possibly can have. And there's also, velocity and veracity of what adversaries are doing today.
Let me add a nuance very quickly. The nuance, however, is it has nothing to do with AI. It has very much to do with the poor funding, the poor infrastructure, the reduction in resources from the government and everything like that, not in AI.
Preach it.
And I will pass it on.
Yeah, let me try to take that and riff right back across it. So Fred, I think what we're showing with like CVEs and 0 days and so forth is the fragility of the infrastructure, right? The fact that we're relying on someone to identify a vulnerability and tell everybody and respond in time is like the banks. Yeah, I remember in the early 90s, right? And everybody was saying, no, the online banking will never happen until everyone has a 3 physical tokens. And it turns out the banks don't care. Well, if your bank, but the reality is that the insurance cost of just saying, fine, we'll just pay that, means that I don't have to pay the infrastructure cost, which is exponentially more. And that's where we've been to date, right? So the idea that we're going to continue to be as secure as we've been, because we have things like the ability to identify vulnerabilities and share them fast enough, is flawed. So we need to go back to, and I take your point, Ira, like the acronyms. Yet again, we're calling something artificial intelligence. To be clear, they're large language models. And I agree emphatically with almost everything you said. And the differences for the purpose of an audience like this don't matter, right? This really is literally just what it is. It's a matter of acceleration. The adversary now can move at this speed because of whatever technology increase. If you couldn't see that coming, you were missing things. The specific aspects of the fact that these are semantic models, large language models that have certain other interesting capabilities is mostly irrelevant, particularly to viewers today, right? Just understand that just because it was comfortable for the last 35 years or so to do things a certain way and avoid doing other things doesn't mean those other things aren't still there. You need to know what's going on, and waiting to get an alert and being able to jump and press the button at the last second was never a long-term plan.
No.
Chris, so I go back to something you said on the banks, right? Just taking the insurance fee and something Fred said, because Fred, I think, clearly outlined there are more and worse threats coming, and yet budgets are being cut and the people are being cut, right? Like the skills. Like, is this a fundamental shift in the risk tolerance of the industry?
Yeah, it is. So no, but here, it's not a fundamental shift. It's a fundamental secret that's coming out, right? Between these 3 gentlemen on the bottom of the screen and myself, we have over 100 years of cybersecurity experience sitting here. And I'm going to ask all 3 of you, in your entire careers, and most of us have been at this for 30 plus years, the 4 of us, right? Have we ever been at a time where we felt secure, where we felt cybersecurity got the budget it deserved, where we felt that we were one step ahead of the bad guys? Never, ever. Let's not kid ourselves and think we came from nirvana and we're descending into the 7 layers of Hades. We've been in hell all along for 30 years, guys. It's getting worse, though. It's getting worse for the things Fred said. Right? We are in, all of a sudden, at least for the last, let's say, 8 years, we've seen security budgets. Actually, they've freed up a little bit. They let you buy your shiny new toys. They let you buy the latest AppSec, this sec, that sec, DevSec, every other sec. And now these boards are saying, wait a second, I'm tired of buying you shiny new trinkets when you haven't fundamentally changed the risk equation. Tell me, what is my risk? What is my exposure? Oh, and by the way, whether it's AI, BI, or PI, these phishing things are getting better. These guys are using better tools, right?
Well, Alan, I fully agree with you, but I still come back to it is, we are, and this is probably not a good thing, but we are in many ways dependent upon the vendors out there to implement AI into the tools. God, I can't believe I said that. To implement better algorithms
It's
into the
recorded, Ira.
tools.
It's
I
recorded.
know. Yes.
It felt
Imp-
good, Ira, though,
imp-
didn't it?
yeah, I'm glad. But we are dependent upon them to use tools, and we're dependent upon vendors who are well equipped and not just the latest and greatest vision that came out of a VC and all of a sudden just got like $100 gajillion. That we have to rely upon them for a large extent. At the same time, and again, I'm kind of biased because my current company does this, but we need, frankly, CISOs to go ahead and understand business aspects of cybersecurity. Ironically, the presentation I'm giving next week at InfoSec World is the art and science of being a CISO, which fundamentally includes the fact that CISOs have been using technology and advances in technology as a tool, but not as a strategy in how they run their program. Because a COO, for example, if they want to determine if they're going to put a new factory in, they go to the operations research department or whatever they call it today and have it mathematically modeled. In cybersecurity, we're not using that. We're basically saying, oh, there's all these AIs and blah, blah, blah. And they use them as a specific tool to implement a technology better, not in how they manage their program, not in how they can go out and say, if you give me X, I return Y, which is available, but they don't know how to do it because they don't have the business background of everyone else.
No. But here's fundamentally, though, guys, this cybersecurity crisis, I don't want to use the word crisis, that's penny, but the cybersecurity posture that we find ourselves in is bigger than any one company can handle. And that's been a problem in cyber for a long time. Maybe 50 companies in the world can really do their own cyber soup to nuts. The rest of them, they rely on public-private partnerships. They rely on the vendors, Ira. They rely on the community to do this. And it's failing. That's the fabric of that's ripping. Go ahead.
I know we're at time as well, but I think it's not a crisis. It's an evolutionary crux, right? You could be a CISO and have learned all how to do this and taken all the lessons and brought them into corporate environments, succeeded to this point, but the conditions are changing. Right, this is a Cambrian, pick your biological model. And unless you're coming at this to say, how do I actually secure this or break it, if you want to think about it that way, then you're just following rote notes, as you say, Alan, from folks, those of us who were back there in the days knew that what we're doing right now is not complete. So these rules are wearing out. They're not going to work next year, maybe not next month.
Fred, you've been a CISO. I wanted to give Fred a chance, Sarah. Fred, you've been a CISO multiple times. You're now helping them. What do you think?
I think the fundamental thing here is we CISOs have to be careful what we wish for, right? You wanted to see at the table, we got to see at the table. And actually what that means is you're treated like a business risk, like everything else. And so now we're looking at the difference between operational risk. Like, let's say I'm a large shoe manufacturer and I can't manufacture shoes for a day. The difference between that and a breach expense, cyber insurers, and so on and so forth, not even comparable. So it's a real, true, just another business risk. And that's hard for cybersecurity professionals to understand or to agree with, but that is the discipline. So, somebody, I think it might have been Chris Gates a while back, was saying, it's really interesting or concerning that we've, gotten to a place where all of this, the magnitude of what we're dealing with in the industry has gotten so much bigger. It's the same, as Chris and Ira said, it's the same thing, just at a much higher velocity. But the bottom line is that if we wanted this to be something the business treated as a business problem, it is. We just don't like the outcome of it. So if we're talking about the value.
I'm going to give you the last word, then we got to move on.
Yeah, oh no, I appreciate that. The issue, though, that a lot of people are not addressing here, in my opinion, is that in many ways, smart CISO has begun to outsource a good portion of their problems. So, for example, we're outsourcing to the cloud providers, we're outsourcing to Office 365, Google Apps, whatever you call those things. And that is taking away a lot of our vulnerabilities as well. And we need to understand that there are ways for a smart CISO to, not offshore, but to outsource a good portion of their infrastructure, which will reduce their threat profile.
But when the stuff hits the fan, it's still the CISO who's in the hot seat.
That's right.
That's correct. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm saying a good portion of it can be handled if you are a relatively small company or even mid-size by outsourcing a good portion of your security to others.
Agreed. Guys, I'd love to talk to the three of you for the next 2 days on this, but we can't. We got to take a break here on Techstrong Gang. We're going to come back and talk about observability. We could probably tie that to security and keep talking. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey, folks, we're back. And as Alan alluded, this next topic will have a security hook into it, because what we're seeing here from a report that the folks put out from Splunk, which, might arguably be a little self-serving on their side, but it makes an interesting point. It says that observability is starting to be everywhere. It used to be observability was kind of driven by DevOps. Now we're starting to talk about it in security. You see the networking folks talking about it. Heck, even the average IT admin is starting to figure out that maybe they need to do more than just monitor stuff. But Alan, is this an overdue conversation? What do you think?
Quite frankly, Mike, I think this is, it's not overdue. It's a little behind the times. First of all, let me just say, I've always admired Splunk, big fan of Splunk. And their observability report, I think they've been doing it now for 2 or 3 years, is actually a good observability report. Splunk generally does good reports. We've helped them some over the years at Techstrong with their reports. So kudos to them. But this is kind of a gee whiz, thanks Captain Obvious kind of thing to me. The rise of OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry rose, 5 years ago. It's the second largest, behind Kubernetes itself, it's the second largest project at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Everybody uses OpenTelemetry. In fact, the entire observability space is based on OpenTelemetry. You don't think so?
Absolutely not. I think OpenTelemetry is a lovely idea and is the second biggest project in terms of contributors, but actual usage out in the field is not nearly as high because
every observability tool.
OpenTelemetry is hard to use and hard to instrument, needs to be
if you're going to let me preface that, Mike. If you're an end user organization looking to use the open source OpenTelemetry and the crappy interface it comes with as your observability tool, you're correct. But that's not what Splunk is talking about here. What Splunk is talking about is every single observability provider is OpenTel under the covers. For my security friends on the panel, it's like when every IDS had Splunk and every vulnerability manager was Nessus. It has become the de facto underneath, along with Prometheus, which is another open source tool, and the folks at with a G Labs, and I forgot their name now. Grafana Labs. Yes, thank you.
You will find that there are plenty of IT organizations still using the proprietary telemetry data collectors because they're easier to manage and they're smoother and they're just better. Now, is that the long-term trend? Probably not.
I think they're going to observability because also the whole observability thing look, Datadog ingests this now and gives you a nice interface on it, or PagerDuty, or any of these kinds of collectors. But let me put this out to you, and I'll bring it home to cybersecurity for us. I posit that observability is this generation's SIM. Right? And remember, we all did our SIM exercises, spent a couple $1 million on SIMs, and it was gonna collect everything from everywhere and show us anything and everything. We're still waiting. I think we have Fred, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
First of all, sorry about that. Agree. As a somewhat of a contributor to that problem, but the observability metrics, I think you're absolutely right. The instrumentation required to make sure your kube clusters run effectively, that you have observability into all of the outsourced services that we now call upon, right? It's huge. When somebody says, why did I not get the right results back from my model from such and such, right? And I have service levels that I have to adhere to. The first indicator something is going wrong, whether it's cyber or otherwise, should probably be the bellwethers of observability. I mean, we certainly think about it in this regard. And I know, Mike, I would say maybe folks that have data centers are probably more in line there. But if you use a cloud service provider, all of this instrumentation is something you've got to weaponize effectively if you're going to run a business. I mean, there's no way not to anymore.
So here's the question I'm trying to get to in my head, and I guess I'll throw this at Dan. So if we have 3 or 4 different disciplines that are investing in observability, should we just have one observability platform, and maybe that's tied to one data lake, and we can have security and networking and DevOps kind of all using the same telemetry data?
It makes a lot of sense, Mike. A lot of challenges in getting there for sure. But I think in the perfect world for observability, it's driving your data observability, it's monitoring your infrastructure. It's really built into how you build applications so that you can, optimize those applications as you're building them, make them really efficient. It's feeding into the financial side on the FinOps and really helping to, bring the cost into containment. I thought, it's interesting, this survey coming out of Splunk, Splunk's really pitching their platform now as a data fabric.
Yeah.
Right. This thing's really got tentacles that's kind of going everywhere. So, it's a novel concept. Like, what if we could actually see what was going on? I think there's been other talks on this show about it's actually pretty expensive to collect all this data.
Yeah, it is.
And if you're not using it for something to really optimize and drive business value, this could be just a money hole that we pour money into. But I like the vision, Mike, of, that kind of unified data set that goes everywhere across the organization. But I think, a lot of challenges in getting there.
Observe it once and it's everywhere. Yeah, like Java.
I'll just say that there's another aspect of observability. Maybe you consider it cybersecurity, but observability can help you determine availability. I've been involved in very large infrastructures where one element, a bizarre element, could be impacted and go down because somebody set a stupid rule that had a cascading effect to take down a major system. And by having observability and knowing where that's coming from in real time, you're able to much more accurately pinpoint in the ideal world where the situation originated from so that you can go back and fix it quickly. Because otherwise you could be losing millions of dollars a minute or availability if it's critical and so on.
Yeah, the topic is taxonomy, right? So I'm going to start with, from the last segment, artificial intelligence is the wrong word. Security information management, SIM, is the right word. And from the earliest days, we've been arguing about this. How do we even have, the CVE, right? Common vulnerability enumeration, enunciation. We've been circling this forever. How do we even have the same language in the logs? And Mike, so we come back to this, let's have a data lake. Let's have all of it. No. Right, we need to get taxonomy, and to the point of this segment, I think this is a good evolutionary indicator. We're getting forced into dealing with the fact that we need to enunciate things the same way. Country of origin. You want a current issue right now? Get a couple of us, working group geeks in the same room and just say that phrase. We'll lose our minds. However, we all live in this global supply chain environment of physical and virtual things. And if I can't understand the basics of the information, the attestations that I'm getting from wherever I need at this moment, without hoovering it all up, making a massive data lake, taking up a data center that covers the state of Arizona, then I'm missing basic things. So this is such a long thread. How do we even say, Alan, you and I have fun on this show with it. Security, information, and event management.
Right.
The fact that they put an E in that acronym flawed the entire market for 20 years.
And did the E go before the I, or is the I after the E? There's no C there. But
right. So we embedded it in logs.
But when we were doing the SIM thing, the holy grail then was, it's a big data problem. We need Hadoop. We need, big data. And then it went from that to, we got this big data thing, but now we need machine learning to go through all that data and make it actionable for us. And it never quite worked. So now we're on to something else. Wait, forget the machine learning. We got, as Ira says, AI. And that's going to solve our basic big data problem here. It may. I think AI is better than some of the other ones we've had at it. But it really, Mike, to your point about, collecting all of this data and using it across the breadth of IT, including security, it's still an actionable intelligence problem.
It is. I'm hopeful that the natural language interface will mean that I don't have to learn these arcane programming languages that the observability platforms put out there, and so that I can figure out what's going on. But Fred, I think part of the problem with observability is when I talked to one person about it, they were like, well, that all sounds great, but I have no idea what questions to ask in the first place.
Well, I think you're right. That's part of why all of the value of the language model capability of, the different optimizations for language processing, because you don't have to learn, this enhanced SQL, CQL, KQL, SPL, ... to ask questions. Now you can ask questions in English or whatever language. But the important part here is you arrive at that conclusion of what questions to ask because you know your infrastructure, right? Only you can prevent forest fires. If you don't understand that, and you don't understand the observability metrics that drive your business, and you don't understand your service level agreements, then none of it's going to matter anyway. But I think the centralization of that problem is something that we've been, wrestling for. It's all harmonics, right? Originally, we said, hey, everything's on a mainframe. Then we said we need terminals. Then we said we need mainframes. Now we need cloud. It's all the same harmonics of going back and forth between distributed and centralized, and distributed and centralized, whether it's compute, it's data centers, it's data, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. But what we know now is we have enough capability that we can distribute that effectively without having to, as Chris put it, which is create the lowest common denominator in the taxonomy that reduces the value of any of it. So now we have that ability. And I think that's one of the really interesting moments that AI cannot provide, is that I just have to ask you simple questions and understand the context. Well, the nomenclature, are we saying all the same words? Doesn't matter anymore. That's okay.
Excellent.
Right. You can, with AI, we can traverse multiple canonical taxonomic domains, right? And that's truly fundamental, right? And in my last little rant, I hope I made sense, because those of you out here watching, you can't imagine the frustration, because 20, 30 years ago, we're like, oh, this shouldn't be that hard. And we're still quibbling about what an acronym means. I don't know if we could ever solve that. But I know, Fred, you said it exactly right. We can now do this. You can literally talk to your interface. Here's what I want, and have it give the answers, and it, how to put this in fewer words. We tried so hard to have little translators at edge domains. It's really, really hard. It's almost as hard as the actual problem. And I get the feeling we can actually do this one now, but we got to end. So
yeah, guys, I got to pull the plug. People, it's the weekend starting. People got to go. I'll leave you with this though. All of this great stuff, does it make us any more secure? Think about it. This is a great week on Techstrong Gang. I hope you've enjoyed it. Of course, we'll have our full Techstrong TV following this. And if you're not watching this on the stream and you had the time to watch it at your leisure, whether it's on our OTT channel or the YouTube channel, Techstrong TV YouTube, or Techstrong.tv, hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be back with more panel. Fantastic. Thanks, guys. We'll have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you Monday with more Techstrong Gang.